You know, every single living thing, from a tiny bacterium all the way up to us, is made of cells. But have you ever really wondered what keeps a cell, well, a cell? What stops it from just dissolving into its surroundings? Today, we're diving deep into the microscopic world of biology's unsung hero, the cell membrane. Okay, so picture this. Every cell in your body is like its own little city. It's got to import supplies, food and oxygen, and it absolutely has to export the trash, like carbon dioxide. But it can't just have wide open borders, right? That would be total chaos. So how in the world does it manage all that traffic? How does it stay alive? Well, the answer comes down to one absolutely crucial concept: homeostasis. Just think of it as the ultimate goal for all life. It's all about keeping everything on the inside perfectly stable and balanced, no matter what's going on outside. And the structure in charge of this whole operation, the master conductor of this incredible symphony, you guessed it, it's the cell membrane. So let's get a closer look at this amazing gatekeeper. It's the bouncer at the door, controlling everything that goes in and out, which is what makes homeostasis possible in the first place. But it has a secret weapon, something that makes its job way, way easier. And it all comes down to size. This is exactly why cells are microscopic. It's all about being efficient. A tiny cell has a huge amount of surface area, that's its membrane, compared to the small amount of space inside. Think of it like a tiny house with tons of doors and windows. It can get supplies in and trash out super, super fast. And for a cell, that kind of speed is literally the difference between life and death. All right, so we know the membrane is a gatekeeper, and we know why it has to work fast. But what is this thing actually made of? How do you build a border that's both a barrier and a gateway? Let's zoom way in and look at the blueprints. Okay, meet the star of the show, the phospholipid. This little guy is the basic brick used to build the entire wall. But it's a really weird kind of brick because it has a split personality, a sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing going on. And that dual nature is the whole secret to how it works. And here's that split personality in action. Each phospholipid has a head that is hydrophilic. It absolutely loves water. But it also has two hydrophobic tails that are terrified of water. So what happens when you dump millions of these into the watery environment of a cell? Well, they automatically build a wall all by themselves. The water-loving heads face outwards, and the water-fearing tails hide in the middle, creating this perfect, self-healing two-layer barrier. It's amazing. But here's the cool part. This isn't some rigid brick wall. It's called the Fluid Mosaic Model for a reason. That phospholipid bilayer is like a sea. It's flexible and always moving. And floating in that sea are all sorts of other important molecules. You've got these big proteins that act as tunnels and pumps. You've got cholesterol wedged in there, kind of like a chaperone, making sure the membrane doesn't get too stiff or too runny. And on the surface, you have these carbohydrate chains that are like unique ID tags for the cell. The key takeaway? Nothing is locked in place. Everything is constantly drifting around in this dynamic, living boundary. Okay, so our border is built. It's strong but flexible. Now, how do we get things across it? Let's start with the easiest way, the path of least resistance. It's a method that requires zero energy from the cell. This is passive transport. So there are really only two ways to get across this membrane. The first is passive transport. I want you to think of this like floating down a river. It takes absolutely no effort. Molecules just naturally move from an area where they're crowded to an area where there's more space. Then you have active transport, which is the complete opposite. It's like trying to swim upstream against the current. We'll get to that in just a minute. Now, even this easy going with the flow transport has a couple of different styles. First up is simple diffusion. This is for the really small, non-charged molecules like oxygen and carbon dioxide. They're so stealthy they can just slip right between the phospholipids, no problem. But what about bigger molecules like sugar or charged ions? No way, they can't just sneak through. They need a special escort. That's where facilitated diffusion comes in. A specific protein channel acts like a private doorway, opening up just for them to pass through safely. All right, let's talk about a very special type of diffusion. This one is so important it gets its own name, osmosis, and it is all about one molecule, water. The rule is super simple. Water will always move from an area where there's a lot of it to an area where there's less of it. It's just trying to balance things out. It's a fundamental force of nature our cells are constantly dealing with. So let's put this to the test. Imagine you take an algae cell from the super salty ocean and you drop it into a vase of pure fresh water.
What's going to happen? Well, the inside of that algae cell is really salty, which means it has a low concentration of water. The freshwater outside has a high concentration of water. So following the rules of osmosis, water is going to rush into the cell trying to balance things out. The cell will swell up, and could actually burst.
But what if a cell needs to do the opposite? What if it needs to hoard a resource, to pull something in that's already more crowded inside the cell than outside? Well, diffusion is working against it now. The natural flow is going the wrong way. To fight that current, the cell has to roll up its sleeves and spend some energy. And that brings us to active transport. This process literally forces molecules to move against their natural flow from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. It's the exact opposite of just floating downstream. And just like pushing a heavy boulder up a steep hill, this does not happen for free. It requires a serious input of energy. So where does a cell get this energy? It gets it from a molecule called ATP. This is the universal energy currency for all life on Earth. Think of it like a tiny, rechargeable battery. When the cell needs to do some work, it snaps off one of ATP's phosphate groups, which releases a powerful burst of energy. That energy then powers these amazing protein pumps, which are like tiny machines that grab molecules on one side and physically shove them to the other side. This is precisely what's happening in your nerve cells every single second you're alive. Now, those protein pumps are fantastic for moving small molecules and ions. But what happens if a cell needs to import or export something really big, like an entire bacterium or a huge protein? There's no channel or pump big enough for that kind of cargo. For the really big stuff, the cell has to get physical. It uses the membrane itself as the transport vehicle. To bring something in, which is called endocytosis, the membrane literally reaches out, wraps around the particle, and pinches off to create a little cargo bubble inside the cell. And to ship things out, in a process called exocytosis, it does the reverse. A bubble full of cargo merges with the membrane from the inside and dumps its contents into the outside world. This is not just some obscure process. This is how your immune cells literally eat invading bacteria. It's called phagocytosis. On the other end, exocytosis is how a plant cell ships out all the raw materials it needs to build its tough outer wall. It's basically the cell solution for heavy-duty shipping and receiving. Okay, we have gone through a ton of microscopic details, right? From phospholipids to osmosis to protein pumps. So now let's zoom all the way back out and talk about why any of this matters to the big picture, which is you. Look, this isn't just stuff in a textbook. Right now, as you're listening to my voice, trillions upon trillions of these transport systems are firing away inside your body. Every breath you take, every muscle you move, every single thought that pops into your head, it is all powered by your cell membranes, working nonstop to manage this impossibly complex traffic, all to maintain that delicate, perfect balance that we call life. So I want to leave you with one last thought about our amazing gatekeeper. It's brilliant, for sure, but it is not foolproof. Its own complex systems can be hijacked. Take the HIV virus, for instance. It is a master of deception. It's evolved to have a surface protein that's a perfect counterfeit key for one of the ID tags on our immune cells. So the membrane's receptor, just doing its job, sees what it thinks is the right ID and opens the door, welcoming the invader inside. It's a pretty sobering reminder that this microscopic border, the one that works so hard to keep us in balance, is also the critical and sometimes vulnerable front line in the constant battle for our health.